Hi, today I'm going to be talking about Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is an inherited disorder. It's an autosomal dominant disorder, and HD is considered a dominant disorder because an individual with just one copy of the Huntington's disease allele typically develops the HD symptoms. As I mentioned on the screen, individuals with Huntington's disease have many CAG versions of the Huntington gene, one that does not function normally within the body and within the Huntington gene itself. This is a progressive and disabling neurodegenerative disorder of the central nervous system. This causes the nerve cells in the brain to progressively break down, and the gain of function ends up being, in a sense, toxic to the body. Since this is inherited, it usually does not tend to skip a generation. It tends to flow every generation. So the etiology behind Huntington, the Huntington gene, so not the disorder itself, is attached to chromosome number 4, and Huntington is a protein needed by nerve cells in the brain. It is used for the body's development before birth, and it becomes faulty when the protein repeats a certain genetic sequence too many times. The genetic principles behind Huntington's disease, there's a psychiatric disruption, a cognitive deficit, and loss of motor coordination. As I'm going to mention in the next slide, there is a very hallmark symptom for Huntington's, and that is the spastic movement of the head, the limbs, and even some parts of the body, and the cognitive deficit, slow thinking, tiredness, all those kinds of things. This is caused by the expansion of a polyglutamine tract within the N-terminal domain of the Huntington protein. So there's the Huntington protein and the alleles in the gene, and the CAG. We all have the Huntington gene, so the CAG may repeat too many times, or there might be one that is faulty, which ends up causing the Huntington disease all around. So just one faulty gene can cause that. So the hallmark symptom, the uncontrolled movement of the arms, the legs, and the head, like I mentioned, the decline in thinking and reasoning skills, memory loss, concentration, judgment, all are very prominent in most cases of HD and are very noticeable. So who does it affect? Adult onset is the most common type of Huntington's disease. It usually appears within a person's 30 to 40s, and there's a juvenile, which is, a more rare type of Huntington's disease, but they tend to have the same effects, except it progresses a little bit differently and speeds up a little bit faster, considering it does start in the earlier ages of life. So one person does inherit two copies of the Huntington gene, one from mom and one from dad. Huntington is not a sex-linked disorder. You can get it from either your mom or your father. And adult onset is the most common, so one can live their whole life practically up until they are maybe diagnosed, where they have lived a normal life and it suddenly happened, and it's still connected back to their parent. Number of cases per year. This is going to be connected with my case in the end. 5 to 7 people out of 100,000 are affected worldwide. And in Venezuela, there is a city called Lake Maracaibo, and 700 out of 100,000 are affected. That is the highest number in Western Europe. So the diagnosis of Huntington's disease, usually people can tell and they maybe bring them into a psychiatric facility because things are wrong, and Huntington sometimes gets misdiagnosed and caught up with other psychiatric disorders that they may not recognize. You can take a blood sample from the DNA for an HD mutation in the gene, which it counts the CAG repeats in a Huntington gene, which, as I mentioned before, causes the faultiness of the gene itself. There's also prenatal testing available to test the fetus, which DNA is extracted from the fetal cells, and parents are allowed to, make the decision whether they would like to terminate the pregnancy or take the chance of their child carrying the protein, the faulty protein, excuse me. Right now, as I mentioned, it's toxic. The gain of function is toxic. This is a lethal disorder. There are treatments designed to relieve symptoms. Tretibenzine is the only approved medication worldwide, which obviously, like I said, there is no cure, so it's only to help with the symptoms, and death is approximated between 15 to 20 years after showing the symptoms. So a adult may be 40 when they start developing these symptoms. So they have a almost 20-year lifespan when they start showing those symptoms. So this doesn't mean 20 years old, you're gonna, it's over even if you don't show symptoms. No, this is 15 to 20 years after. So what I want to talk about now is I want to go in detail about my case study. I can get this. There we go. Okay, so my case study is actually very long because it was all in Turkish on the internet, so I had to find a very long one. I will try to summarize it. Excuse me, that was very loud. So SK was a 28-year-old female. The story taken from her mother and brother when she was having these psychiatric mishaps. Her complaint started 4 years before this time that they were telling the story. Isolation at first, looking at the floor while making eye contact after meaningless speech, itchiness, not eating food added to her complaints. A psychiatric examination was decreased, and visual hallucinations, irritable mood, and affected shallowness were noted in her medical history. In the family history, there was no psychiatric disorders, which caught a lot of the doctors off guard. The patient was hospitalized with a diagnosis of a psychotic disorder. As I mentioned before, is very confusing to pair with HD. For investigating the etiology of the diagnosis of the first episode of psychosis, there was no pathology detected in that at all. By detailing the family history, they ended up finding out she had relatives with HD in her father's family, and her father died at the age of 45. A blood sample was taken from the patient, and it came back positive for HD. The current treatment of the patient is a few medications. She does not have psychotic symptoms. These medications have masked it, but the process of her involuntary movements, dysphasia, dysymmetry, and cognitive failure has not changed. And I really hope in the future there is more research over HD, because I know it is a very painful disorder. Thank you for this time, and I hope you have a great day.